All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who've experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here with my very special guest, Juditta Ben-David. Juditta, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for the podcast also. It's a really interesting podcast.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. So Juditta Ben-David is founder of the Mindfulness in Arabic project, otherwise known as MIA. MIA aims to build a website that will offer an 8-week mindfulness course in Arabic, designed for refugees and people in transition. Any person with internet access may enter the website free of charge anywhere around the world. The course will provide practical tools and exercises tailored specifically to support a shaken population that suffered traumas of fear, death, and extreme violence. The website will also provide tools for therapists, social workers, welfare, and volunteers who are currently working with refugee populations so that they may use mindfulness-based tools for their own needs in coping with the work stress and related DP camp difficult experiences, as well as passing them on to their clients. MIA developed out of the work of Juditta, working there with refugees and their supporters, counselors, and social workers. The request for additional tools led to a crowdfunding campaign, raising one half of the funds needed to launch their 8-week course. MIA is thankful to be supported by leading mindfulness instructors like Jon Kabat Zinn, Jack Kornfield, Brach, Christopher Titmuss, and Patricia Genoud-Feldman, as well as mindfulness providers like Headspace and Mindful Magazine. All right. So Juditta, before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from and where you're calling from, and then let's do it.
Okay. So I'm calling from Israel, and I am Israeli. And I'm also sort of like a citizen of the world in a way, because I lived in many, many places during my developmental years. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, I guess.
Okay. Well, like I said, it's great having you on here. So let's, before we start talking about MIA, I want to kind of hear your story, how this all came about. And I realize this can be a huge story, but I want you to, with all due respect, kind of give us the nutshell version, if you will.
Okay. Well, you sort of like had a question there about what led me. Could I start from that question?
Please do.
Okay. So, because I've been many years now in therapy and teaching therapy and facilitating therapy. And actually this question about what led me to specifically to trauma therapy was very interesting for me. And I became curious about that. It's sort of like changes a lot of times also from situation to situation, or from, one life stage to another. And I was thinking about it and said, it's actually today is the day that we sat after my mother died. She died on Monday. And yeah. And I'm sitting there, and a lot of trauma memories are coming up, and I need to do my own work whilst I'm sitting there as well, in this big family connection, and so that's sort of like the first thing that, it's like, yeah, I come from a place that I had to do a lot of work on my own story, from my own roots. That would be more developmental trauma. And then when I was a child, an old aunt came to live underneath us. And she came from the Auschwitz camps. And she was one very strong PTSD, but then we did not know that. It was not called that way. and she couldn't speak anything except German, and but she all the time told me all of the stories. And so later on, I could see how I'm sort of like rehashing these stories and trying to tell them also to other kids to make sense of it. And a lot of that also, and the pain that she was carrying, and to see how a person that goes through this and that his family is being, extinct, how that can affect her possibility to adapt to a new place, which was very bad. And then when I was a child, I was actually living in the United States, and in Michigan, of all places. And my best friend was an Egyptian girl. And the 6-Day War started, and I saw on TV that the Israelis bombed the Egyptian airplanes. And I couldn't get it. I couldn't understand this, And I could see how that affected, again, our relationships around in that same place, in the student camp that was there. And later on, going around the world, as I said, I could see how violence and trauma and suffering is happening. Next to my therapy studies, I was also studying since 1990 Buddhist studies, Vipassana and mindfulness, of course, now, but also a lot of very the root of the Buddhist studies. And that really affected me, that touched me. And the connection between these two also led me to understand, the wheel of karma also, and how things sort of like affect each other, and how trauma can get stronger and stronger, and how the one that's traumatized then sometimes becomes the perpetrator himself or herself. And, all of that really started to make sense. And living here in Israel also, we see how this happens in everyday life, and this is very, very sad. But this is also, sometimes it feels also like a cage. Working also with traumatized soldiers, working also with Syrians that come from Syria and they are wounded, and how to also find the way to, have those two live together. So I think that is sort of like where I'm coming from, except from all of the other things that I learned and studied, and, even began from medicine studies in the beginning of my academic studies. And all of that sort of like came and became something that I'm very much interested about. And also that I really want to share with people that are in crisis right now, that are being displaced right now, that are going through that, moving, that walking of a population, and to see how, and if there is some way that these tools that I also used on myself, but also in my clinic, if I can also share them with them.
Thank you, Juditta, for sharing that. I mean, it sounds like a extremely rich and at the same time very almost trauma-filled environment.
Yes.
I think you certainly laid the foundation for us to understand what inspired you to get into this field and what's almost the backdrop. But not everyone does the work you're doing in that environment. If you can talk a little bit more about what was going on in your mind such that you said, okay, I want to get into this field. I want to start helping people or working with people who are suffering from trauma. What was that process like for you?
The truth is, I don't think that there was a process in itself. I mean, all of these things were a process underneath. But then what happened was that I was teaching breath work, and I was, in the psychotherapy field already, and some Gestalt and Jungian approaches and body-oriented psychotherapy. And out of that and my Vipassana and Buddhist studies on the side, so a little bit of Mahayana, something was coming into a connection between these in my own work, which I thought that they're not. But my students said, hey, you're teaching Buddhist studies also, Mm-hmm. So then I started to give it some thought and to look at it. And then Peter Levine came to Israel. And I heard him and I just felt, wow, this is it, for me also. I just felt I was like, you're talking me here, Mm-hmm. It's really nice. I mean, it's when you have that click, that, okay, this is my language. Now I know, right. Where I'm going. Right. And that's what started it, really.
Okay. So currently you're working with kind of getting Mia off the ground, but if I'm hearing you correctly, are you working in private practice or in a different? Talk a little bit more. What does that look like? Who are you? You talked a little bit about working with people who are soldiers and so forth.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So my clinic is also a clinic, on the ground, but also via Skype.
Okay.
Or Zoom nowadays, yeah. And I have grown-ups like between 17 and 69, 70, And what we work with is, life. It's not only about trauma, because you really need to balance yourself out when you work with this kind of, with this subject and with this, these cathectic energies. So you balance yourself out. And that's also an advice that I'm giving to therapists. And then the population that is coming are also for soldiers that have gone through trauma or that are holding PTSD already. And sometimes also car accidents and women with sexual abuse, or sometimes also LGBT people that are coming from the group. We have a group in the Tel Aviv area, very alive group that are coming with very interesting and very curious questions. And I also work in the northern hospitals with wounded Syrians that are coming over, because the hospitals in the north of Israel give medical care to wounded Syrians. And usually there what I do is I work with the social workers there. I also work through the Red Cross to teach, to educate, to supervise the social workers that are working with the Syrians. Mm-hmm. And I've been teaching in colleges and universities. I teach in Turkey. I work with NGOs in Turkey that are working with refugees, but I also taught like in Mimar Sinan University, or in Ireland also in a university, and also a psychotherapy center. So I bring these tools as well through teaching, not only in the clinic. Yeah.
Before we kind of jump into the genesis of Mia, can you share a little bit about what you're teaching specifically to these social workers who are working with soldiers?
Okay. I'm teaching them a lot of techniques that we call psychophysical techniques, or what other people call sometimes the third wave techniques. And those are techniques that are based in the body and based in mindfulness, and that understand, the neuroscience of the background of trauma, and that you can use within your own processes. Sometimes what we teach, or I teach, but I also usually have a co-facilitator, because I really like to teach in the two languages. Mm-hmm. And I pretty much insist on teaching in the two languages, in Hebrew and Arabic, or English and Arabic, so that they will hear it already in Arabic, that they will feel it in Arabic. Because when you go into their inner landscapes, you really need your own mother tongue in there. So that's something that we're doing also that is special. But when we come, we sort of like give sort of like an overview of what now is known about trauma and the processes of trauma in the nervous system, in the brain, polyvagal theory, things like that. And we also teach mindfulness in a nutshell, but just to give some kind of a sense of that quality of attention. And also then we go into some resourcing. A lot of times would be the first thing, and how to build resources, and then a little bit to talk about titration and simple tools. Sometimes we bring tools actually from not from Peter's work, but from his students' work. Elaine Carras, I don't know if you know her, but
she's been on the podcast. Yeah.
Doing really good work, and I studied with her, and she actually invited me over to Turkey to work with her. So she has some great tools. We bring those in, and also the mindfulness that we're bringing is mindfulness that is adapted, that is broken down, and with a lot of questions about where are they and how is it for them, and of course, after that, we also supervise. I supervise. Supervision is usually what I do, and I supervise so they can bring, things that happened with the soldiers or with the wounded warriors. Sometimes also with mothers and children that are coming over from Syria, and to see how does it affect them also, because we're also working with a secondary trauma, and we're also working, and that's what I sort of like was pointing out to before, we're also working with very difficult emotional conflicts, because sometimes the person, the healthcare person, is from a different faith than the people that are coming from Syria, and they don't know exactly what these Syrians have done before, but they could have actually been hurting their own faith. So there's sometimes like really difficult emotional conflicts which we need to supervise and to see how to, resource the healthcare person also.
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and one that's a very specific point. One I really haven't talked so much about on this podcast. Juditta, let's talk about Mia and how did that come about?
Okay, it came about, I think. What was it? Maybe I think 2.5 years ago. It came about actually from a few corners, and I will say what was the influence. One of the influences was actually an Israeli soldier that spoke very painfully about his experiences and how he wanted to give something back, because he felt that he was really acting brutally and in a sort of like incoherent, unintegrated way with his own value system whilst he was a soldier, and he really wanted to give something back. And the refugees were on their way, and what was happening in Syria brought up for him, traumatic memories as well. And so he said, I want you to do something. I want to support something like that we could do something for the refugees with these tools that he already experienced. Then we heard from Palestinians from the West Bank, because I have some connections. For quite a few years, I've been in groups of Palestinians and Israelis. So we heard from the Palestinian side that they're having a lot of a lack, actually, of knowledge of mindfulness, and they want to know more of it, but they don't have it in Arabic, and they don't know Hebrew and English that well nowadays. They used to, but nowadays they don't, because of the closing off of the Palestinian state. So they asked us to have it in Arabic. And then I was working in Turkey, and I was working with refugees themselves and the counselors to the refugees themselves. And with Elaine Carras, but we also understood, and we were hearing very closely, that they need very basic tools in order to come back into their bodies. We found out that the culture there is very different. So like immediately they can go more easily into the emotions, but that sometimes creates even more upheaval and turmoil. And we wanted to find a way that they could go and sort of like ground and resource and come back to those building, pieces of sensations. So all of that sort of like came to the understanding that we need to find a way to bring mindfulness to the crisis areas, but also that we need to bring mindfulness to refugees in their own language. Now that was very interesting as well, because Arabic is an amazingly rich language and it has many, many dialects. So we have to sort of like focus on a dialect that is good for the Middle East, Palestinians, Syrians, old Iraqi people, so Jordanians. So that's sort of like a dialect that we try to understand, what would be its boundaries, because it's sort of like more, how would you call it? Like sort of like daily Arabic, and spoken Arabic. And then the other thing was that we understood, and that's something that's being understood now in the mindfulness field and the mindfulness arena, is that mindfulness per se cannot be a tool for trauma. A lot of times, just like Vipassana in the past, a lot of times it can bring out and up things. And if you don't have the tools to balance, you don't have, this understanding of how to regulate yourself, then it can be actually a hindrance, and it's not actually.
I think that's a really salient point you're making, and one to kind of highlight. So just to be clear, you're not saying mindfulness is you're introducing it simply to heal trauma.
Mm-mm.
Right.
No.
Right.
No. And we're also bringing into this mindfulness, we're bringing trauma-informed knowledge, and it's going to be like we educate in things about trauma. We're going to educate about, trauma-informed mindfulness, and inside this course that is being built. And we're also doing it culturally sensitive, which means that we're bringing metaphors that are more useful to the people that come from the Arabic world, as well as not, making it very, very, very secular, so they do not feel that it's sort of like opposing their faith. Way. But with what I would like to say about the trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed mindfulness is that we bring things that, now in trauma therapy, already, but in mindfulness, in the old type of mindfulness, in the traditional type of mindfulness, and even in Jon Kabat Zinn's mindfulness, which is amazing, but you wouldn't think about resourcing somebody first. Okay. Actually, in the tradition, the Buddhist tradition, it is there. Specifically in the Mahayana really emphasizes that you resource yourself first, whether it's in loving kindness or Tonglen, or these are things that sort of like bring up compassion, which can be also self-compassion. That's also a resource. So, and then you go into, deep seeing and into, coming closer to the pain, being able to sit with the pain. So we're trying to find a way that will have the information about, just like when we speak about mindfulness, a lot of times we speak about the breath being sort of like the rhapsody. The breath a lot of times was a resource, but we actually, with trauma-afflicted people, can't always use the breath as the rest, So we need to understand what else could you find, your sort of like resource in, or your anchor in, and then work with that and start with very small segments.
Just want to remind everyone that I'm speaking with Juditta Ben-David. She's the founder of the Mindfulness in Arabic project, otherwise known as M.A. So this is a project in development, and you're seeking raise funds to get this off the ground? Talk a little bit about literally how this thing is going to get off the ground.
Mm-hmm. So we did the crowdfunding, and we did get half of the money that we needed, half of the funds that we needed. And so we're in the translation process, and we're in the beta phase, which is we're sending out to people that are willing to give us feedback. We're sending out the meditations, the documents, the instructions to see, to have this interactive approach with the people, and to see what do we need to fill in or to omit, etc. And we also have a group of advisors that have been working with the Arabic population but come from the trauma field. Mm-hmm. And we're sort of like brainstorming one week after the other. And what we really want, we could benefit greatly from, of course, for more funds so that we can finish this. We have already the first 2 weeks. One of the weeks is on already. Second week is now in the act of coming onto the internet. Mm-hmm. And we would like to get more money because we also want the website to be interactive itself, because as we know, people might need some help sometimes in certain situations. And what our biggest dream, and that is really, if somebody wants to help us out with this, is to create the first facilitator course. There has never been a course in Arabic, and we want to create the first Train the Trainers course specifically for trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive mindfulness. So that's sort of like the dream step right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how much more money do you need to get this going?
I think that something between $30,000 and $50,000 would be.
Okay. And I can put a link up here in the show notes page for people to support. Okay. And it also, I think I mentioned it in your bio, you're being supported by some leading mindfulness individuals like Jon Kabat Zinn and Kornfield and Tara Brach. How did you get affiliated with them? How did you bring them on board?
First of all, they're so generous people, really. I really bow in front of them. And I'm also studying now with Tara and Jack on the 2-year mindfulness teacher training course. And they offered that also as a stipend, because it was really so generous that it's amazing. Jon also was very generous. He really wants this, out there. He really wants it to be he really believes in this tool, and he wants it to to arrive to many populations as possible. But also the other sort of like mindfulness teachers and mindfulness communities were very happy to support us. And I think that part of it is also, and Jack and Joseph Goldstein was also, and because first of all, I was their student many years back, Joseph was my first teacher, actually, and Jon was in the Cambridge Insight Society, where Larry was the teacher, and he was also my teacher. And later on, I was also facilitating and teaching Vipassana and mindfulness and intro courses here in Israel and abroad. So I think that also that I'm a professional in the field, sort of like also attracted them, that they felt that they could support this. Yeah.
Before we go, I want to kind of hone in on the population you're serving here with refugees and displaced people. Talk a little bit about their needs.
Well, there's so many needs there, but you can feel that when somebody is, doesn't have roots, and when you're being bombed, when you're being, thrown away from your own place, when you're being thrown away from your culture, from your language, when you don't really know when you'll be coming back. Because in the beginning, people were thinking that they're coming back pretty soon, but it follows 1 year after the other, and you're not really sure you're going to be back also, and there are many issues of loss, not only, of being thrown away or not grounded, but also these really deep feelings of loss and a lot of fear. And a lot of times that comes, in very small ways. A lot of times that does not help them to adapt to a new place, just what I was speaking about with my aunt, that's sort of like limbo place, that you don't know, and you don't know. So where's your next step? Where, and you've been pushed from one place to the other, and sometimes also that the families are displaced. Like I was working with a woman in Turkey that part of her family is in Germany, part of her family is still in Syria, and they can't see each other anymore. All they can see each other now is in the Zoom, and we're speaking about a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, and they don't know when they're going to be seeing each other again. And this, we're talking about a traditional society when it's, opposing the Western society, where there would not be such an issue that they wouldn't see each other. They would live very closely to each other. And then also, of course, there are wounds of the flesh, not only wounds of the emotional side, and there are things that they saw that were horrific, people dying, on the land and sea, and the surprise, the betrayal of one community against the other as well, because there were some communities there that were invited a few years back to live with them, but once the war began, they were immediately, they became the enemy. And this happens in kinds of situations where there is very great violence and people are not feeling secure anymore. So there's a lot of betrayal happening as well. And betrayal is also trauma. A lot of we work with that a lot as well. So out of those places, come the needs as well. That a lot of times self-regulation, emotional self-regulation, a lot of times just to, bring a little bit more clarity into the situation. They do need to approach situations and to be able to solve, and to be able to choose things. And a lot of times, as we know in trauma, that is not there, so we want to work with them so that they will be able to come to that position that they feel that they can solve and decide for themselves also, And of course, communication, to be able to communicate their needs and to be able to communicate their feelings and to return, as we say, the locus of control. So inside a crisis situation and being a refugee, that sometimes feels a little bit megalomaniac or a little bit, out of the logic. But we found that even small steps of these are really important. Mm-hmm. And the people feel it, and they come and they come with a lot of thanks and a lot of gratitude when they feel it with small changes.
I mean, I think what you're doing is just phenomenal. I'm just listening to you talk, in response to my question about the needs. It just seems overwhelming. And I could just imagine as a clinician what it would be like. And I'm not going to say I can imagine what it would be like as a refugee, but just from what you're saying, it just sounds overwhelming again. And I love what you said about just those small incremental steps are going to be so important. Juditta, as we close out here, I want to ask you about any go-to book recommendation for our listeners, anything, whether it's trauma related or mindfulness related or not. What would you recommend?
Okay. So of course, first of all, I would say Waking Tiger, but I guess a lot of people have said that already, by Peter Levine. I really like it. I also like Gina's Ross manual that she sort of like created from Waking Tiger, and it's I think it's from the trauma vortex to the healing vortex. But those are sort of like very sort of like basic. But I would like to say there's a book by Michael O'Loughlin, and I would recommend to look for it. It's from 2014. It's called Fragments of Trauma and the Social Production of Suffering. And it's a very interesting book for people that want to think about the ways that trauma can affect society also.
Okay. So Fragments of Trauma and the Social Production of Suffering, Trauma, History, and Memory. And that's by Michael O'Loughlin. Okay, I'll have that linked up here at the show notes page.
Of course, the other thing is David Treleaven's latest book, Mindfulness, Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness.
All right, also a previous guest on the podcast here. Juditta, I want to thank you so much. You've brought to this podcast another chapter of what needs to be addressed in this world, in this unfortunately giant world of trauma that we're living in now. But I love the voice you're bringing to this, and I look forward to helping you support your project, Mindfulness in Arabic project. I'll have a link at the show notes page if people want to help support you, if they want to donate, and we'll do what we can here. But it's been an honor having you on here. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you very much also. It's been an honor to be here.